This is not a story about wilderness survival. It is not a story about a family living off the grid in some televised version of American ruggedness. It is something far harder to watch, a story about what happens when the camera stops rolling and the real life underneath refuses to hold together. Because behind the image of the wolf pack, behind the Alaskan Bush People brand that Discovery Channel built into one of its most recognizable franchises, a quieter and far more painful reality was unfolding. And before he died at 43 years old, Matt Brown had admitted something that the show never quite captured: how much he hated the life that had made him famous and the people he held responsible for it. Matt Brown first appeared on national television on May 6, 2014, when Alaskan Bush People premiered on Discovery Channel. The series introduced viewers to Billy Brown, Ami Brown, and their 7 children, Matt, Bam Bam, Bear Gabe, Noah, Snowbird, and Rain, as a family living deep in the Alaskan wilderness, deliberately removed from modern society. As the oldest of the Brown children, Matt quickly became one of the most recognizable faces on the show. During the early seasons, filmed primarily around Hoonah and Chichagof Island in southeast Alaska, he appeared constantly at the center of shelter construction, boat travel, hunting trips, and the ongoing effort to build what the family called Browntown. To millions of viewers, he was presented as one of Billy Brown's most capable sons, a key pillar of the family's survival operation. But even in those early years, the reality behind the reality show was more complicated than what audiences saw on screen. While the series marketed the Browns as a family living in near total isolation, production required camera crews, support staff, transportation logistics, permitting arrangements, and carefully planned filming schedules. The remote locations were real. So was the extensive production infrastructure needed to capture life there. Matt spent much of this period balancing the role of family member with the role of reality television cast member, a distinction that would become increasingly important as the years wore on. Throughout the first 2 seasons, Matt was portrayed as one of the family's workhorses. He participated in major building projects, wilderness expeditions, and supply runs, regularly appearing alongside his brothers during the kind of physically demanding tasks the show made its identity around. The narrative repeatedly emphasized the importance of the older sons in helping Billy execute ambitious projects in difficult terrain. The family's profile grew rapidly. By its 2nd and 3rd seasons, Alaskan Bush People had become one of Discovery's most talked-about reality programs, regularly attracting audiences in the millions. But increased attention brought increased scrutiny. Questions emerged about the family's residency claims and the authenticity of certain elements of the wilderness narrative. As filming continued through 2015 and into 2016, the family's center of gravity began shifting away from Alaska. Production increasingly focused on Washington state, particularly the North Cascades region and Okanagan County, where the Browns would eventually establish a new homestead. Matt remained a visible part of that transition. Episodes documented the family clearing land, building structures, and adapting to a different environment while trying to preserve the rugged identity that had made the show a success. For viewers, it was another chapter in the family's survival story. For production, it was a more practical and accessible filming location. At this stage, Matt's public identity remained almost entirely tied to the Brown family brand. He was not presented as an independent personality with his own storyline. He was part of the collective. His value within the narrative came from what he did, not from who he was. There were no public signs of serious conflict. But underneath the surface, something was already breaking. By 2016, the first visible cracks had appeared. After spending the show's early years as one of the most prominent members of the Wolf Pack, Matt entered rehabilitation for alcohol addiction. It was the first major documented interruption in his life on and off camera. That year, he sought treatment in California, including at the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, a facility that had treated thousands of addiction patients since its founding in 1982. For the first time since the show premiered, Matt's storyline was no longer centered on wilderness survival. His departure immediately affected the show's structure. During the first several seasons, he had been one of the family's most visible adult sons. When he entered treatment, production continued filming without him, and the responsibilities that had often fallen to Matt were redistributed among his brothers, Bear, Gabe, Noah, and Bam Bam. The change altered the balance of a television series that had spent years presenting the Brown family as a tightly coordinated unit. Publicly, the family responded with support. Billy Brown openly discussed his son's struggle in interviews, describing addiction as a difficult battle requiring professional treatment. Rather than framing the situation as a family conflict, he portrayed it as a health crisis. Discovery Channel's coverage similarly emphasized rehabilitation and recovery. At this stage, there were no verified public accusations between Matt and his parents. Then, in April 2017, another crisis hit. Ami Brown was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, despite never having smoked. Doctors gave her a very low survival probability, with some reports citing only a 3% chance. Treatment required extensive travel and medical care in Southern California, where she underwent radiation and chemotherapy. The diagnosis transformed the family's priorities almost overnight. Throughout 2017, Alaskan Bush people continued production despite both crises unfolding simultaneously. Cameras followed the family's relocation efforts and Ami's treatment journey, while Matt's appearances became increasingly inconsistent. In some episodes, he returned briefly. In others, he was absent entirely. By 2018, Matt had publicly discussed his sobriety efforts and appeared committed to recovery. But reports indicated that his struggle had not fully ended. Recovery was proving to be a process rather than a single event. And by September 2018, those concerns became public again when Matt entered rehabilitation for a second time. He voluntarily checked himself in after recognizing he was losing control of his sobriety. The timing was significant. By then, the Brown family had largely transitioned its operations to Washington State, where filming centered around the 435-acre North Star Ranch property in Okanagan County. Discovery Channel continued producing new seasons, documenting the family's efforts to build homes, clear land, and establish permanent roots in the Pacific Northwest. The production schedule moved forward regardless of individual circumstances. As Matt's participation fluctuated, other family members naturally absorbed more screen time and responsibility. By late 2018, he existed in a strange middle ground, not officially gone from the show, but no longer fully embedded within it. The decisive shift arrived in 2019. By that point, Matt had effectively stopped participating in Alaskan Bush People as a regular cast member. There was no dramatic farewell episode, no public firing, no official announcement. He simply disappeared from the show's central storylines. After approximately 5 years on the series, his role faded from the production's ongoing narrative. Discovery continued producing new seasons featuring Billy, Ami, Bear, Gabe, Noah, Rain, and Snowbird. Matt's presence became part of the show's history rather than its future. By the time he disappeared from the screen in 2019, the Brown family's television world had already begun reorganizing itself without him. Billy and Ami became even more central. Billy remained the patriarch, narrator, and driving force behind many of the series' major decisions. Ami had become a symbol of resilience after surviving her cancer diagnosis and aggressive treatment in California. And then, on February 7th, 2021, the family's foundation suddenly collapsed. Billy Brown died at the age of 68 after suffering a seizure at the family's property in Washington State. His son Bear Brown publicly confirmed the death through social media, describing Billy as their best friend. The announcement shocked viewers because Billy had remained the central figure of the show since its debut. His death was far more than the loss of a cast member. It was the loss of the person around whom the family's entire public identity had been built. Matt had already been absent from the family's television life for roughly 2 years by then. Communication between him and various family members had become increasingly limited. In the months following Billy's death, Matt spoke publicly about his father on several occasions. In one social media video, He indicated that he had been able to find some level of peace regarding Billy before his passing. And then came the moment when everything changed. Beginning in 2021, Matt started posting videos directly to Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, speaking to viewers without producers, network executives, or family members acting as intermediaries. For the first time since the series premiered, he was publicly telling his version of events in his own words. In a series of videos posted throughout 2021 and 2022, Matt alleged that his relationship with the show's production system had been far more complicated than viewers ever realized. He claimed that he had contributed significantly to the success of Alaskan Bush people, but had not been compensated in a way that reflected that contribution. In one widely circulated video, he suggested that while the series generated substantial revenue, he felt he had received comparatively little control over his own role and future. He also described feeling marginalized within decision-making processes involving both production and family matters. Matt also repeatedly stated that concerns he raised about family dynamics and production issues were often attributed to his addiction or mental health problems rather than being addressed directly. He argued that disagreements and frustrations were sometimes dismissed because of his history with alcohol dependency. These claims resonated with some viewers because they fit into a broader narrative of an individual attempting to separate legitimate grievances from the consequences of past addiction. In one of his widely circulated statements, he said, "Everybody's told me that other people's secrets aren't mine to tell, but they're destroying me, and they've been destroying me for a long time." He also alleged that money tied to the series had been controlled within the family structure, and that his parents had taken money he had earned from his appearances on television. He claimed that producers had portrayed him as a troubled person and made more serious accusations about the filming environment itself, including claims that controlled substances were present within that ecosystem, which he linked to his own struggles. The Discovery Channel did not issue a detailed public response. No widely reported lawsuits resulted in findings that confirmed his claims. Matt's account was, ultimately, his own retelling of what he had lived through, but it painted a picture that the show had never bothered to show. After stepping away from regular filming, following multiple documented rehabilitation stays for alcohol addiction, Matt lived independently, outside the structured filming schedule that continued to define the rest of the Brown family's televised existence. Public reporting continued to frame his situation through the lens of addiction recovery and relapse. He had openly discussed his struggles with alcohol over the years, while the rest of his family maintained the public identity built around the series. Then, in late May 2026, Matt was reported missing. The initial concern emerged after an unidentified man was reported in the river on or around May 27th, prompting deputies from the Okanagan County Sheriff's Office to deploy boats, sonar equipment, divers, and search teams to the area. Authorities confirmed that conditions were extremely difficult, with fast currents and rising water levels complicating visibility and recovery efforts. On May 29th, a source close to the family told media that relatives were in contact with police and waiting to hear. Bear Brown publicly expressed fear that Matt may have died after reports emerged of a man seen floating face down in the river. A witness had described a man entering shallow water before being swept away. Bear Brown began sharing public updates, suggesting the family feared the worst. Authorities formally suspended portions of the search operation, citing dangerous river conditions and the increasing likelihood that the individual had already been carried downstream. By May 30th, after days of coordinated search efforts involving law enforcement, volunteers, and private rescue participants, a body was recovered from the Okanagan River near Oroville, Washington. The recovery was assisted by a small group of private citizens and later confirmed through family identification procedures. Bear Brown publicly confirmed the identification, stating, "They found a body in the river a few hours ago, and it was positively identified as being Matt." His brother Noah Brown was present at the site when the body was pulled from the water. Law enforcement treated the death as part of an ongoing coroner's investigation. Early reporting indicated that a firearm was recovered near the scene, and preliminary findings suggested the death appeared to be self-inflicted. Following confirmation of his death, The Brown family released statements expressing grief and remembering Matt as a creative, intelligent, and deeply curious person who loved the outdoors. Looking back, many observers viewed his story as one of gradual separation from the systems that had once defined his life: reality television, family identity, and public visibility. What began as a highly visible role within the wolf pack ultimately became a far more private struggle. And then, quietly away from the cameras that had once followed his every move, it ended. If this story brought up anything difficult for you, please know that support is available. You can reach the International Association for Suicide Prevention's Crisis Center directory at https://www.isp.info/resources/crisis_centers. Or if you're in Pakistan, you can contact Umang at 0317-428-8665. You don't have to carry hard things alone.